Hey everybody, we are at Genesis 17 today, and the heading of this, if you're looking at, again, I read from a parallel Bible, so I have different translations in here. I've got King James Version, New International Version, New Living Translation, which is what I typically read from personally, and through these, that's usually what I'm narrating, and then New American Standard Bible. And the heading of this chapter, because sometimes you have a little heading above things, right? It'll say this section is, and this is called the Covenant of Circumcision in King James and New International Version. In the New Living Translation, the header is Abram is named Abraham. Okay, so we see that he's about to be renamed here. And then in the New American Standard Bible, it kind of ties both of these. It says Abraham and the Covenant of Circumcision. So now that I've read circumcision a few times as a male, I'm super comfortable to hop right into this chapter. Here we go. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Serve me faithfully and live a blameless life. So that's verse 1. So things to point out, okay? 1, again, you have the Lord appeared to him and said. So the Lord is appearing to Abraham. So again, he's making contact and in communion with a person. So it shows that God is able to do that and that he does do that. That this close relationship is one where God appears and he's not only seen, but he is speaking and communicating as well. So it shows that God is capable of doing that. In the statement, God says, I am God Almighty. Again, he starts off and establishes, and I love that it starts with I am. And then he says, God Almighty. Almighty is capitalized in this because it is in all authority. And we've seen that throughout, if nothing else, I mean, he would establish that just as the creator and the maker of all things. But we see that God is in all powerful. And here he is asserting that again. I am God Almighty. Serve me faithfully and live a blameless life. So you've got these call to actions. God defines himself, right? And then he says in response, here's your call to action. Here's how you respond. My call to you is this. Serve me faithfully. Okay, faithfully is a big word there. And live a blameless life. Now, we'll keep going. I will make a covenant with you by which I will guarantee to make you into a mighty nation. So this is big because, again, you have God saying, I will, okay, and then clarifying. So God's done this thing, and what we've seen so far, because, again, I want us to keep building on what we've learned so far, is that God, when he speaks the I wills, he does. When he says something will, it does, especially if it's something that he has created and he's put that potential into, it does. So God is faithful, and when he says, I will or it will, that happens. So we see that he's faithful and he's true and he's speaking truth, and he can speak that proactively, I guess. I don't know. But that's an interesting thing. So he says, I will make a covenant with you. And then he starts to clarify, by which I will guarantee. He's speaking of his faithfulness there. I'm making a covenant with you. Also, you need to know, I don't break my covenants. I don't break my promises. If I speak it, it is so. And if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, son. So this is really cool. By which I will guarantee to make you into a mighty nation. So I'm going to make you into a mighty nation. What I ask you to do is serve me faithfully, live a blameless life. I want you to know that I, God Almighty, am going to do this. I'm going to make you into a mighty nation. I'm going to make a covenant with you. And this is what I'm going to do through this. Beautiful. Then, at this is verse 3, Abram fell face down in the dust. I love that because I think a big part of our faith and our response to God should be face down. Not out of fear. I mean, fear is a part of it, but more out of reverence and out of just his holiness. And I love that it has this extra little note there, fell face down in the dust. Because if you read these other translations, they don't have that dust. It just says Abram fell face down. Abram fell on his face. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, so I love that it has that little side note in this translation. Fell face down in the dust. because like that makes it so much more real and visceral. But more importantly, I think it's kind of symbolic too, because like from the dust you came, to the dust you shall return. Like God formed man from the dust. So like it's like it points almost to our mortality and the fact that life was given, and even given by God, and that we came from the dust. So it's almost like acknowledging being created and given life and that breath of life from God. So I love that. Yeah. Then God said to him, and this leads into verse 4, "This is my covenant with you." So again, God speaks, and we've seen a pattern where God says, I'm going to do this, or I'm asking you to do this. And then like specifically with Noah, we saw him saying, I'm going to make this covenant, I need you to do this. Okay, I'm making this covenant because, or I'm doing this because. He like spells it out a little bit more, so he expounds on it. And I love that God is doing that here. This is my covenant with you. So I'm going to make you into a mighty nation. But here's my covenant. He spells it out. I will make you the father of not just one nation, but a multitude of nations. So that's interesting, because before he said, I guarantee to make you into a mighty nation. And that's like singular, but here he's expounding on this and saying, not just one nation. I'm not making you a father of just one nation. This is a multitude of nations. And again, what's interesting here is that you see God is all about multiplication, right? Making a way and multiplying things. So you saw go forth and multiply is the kind of call to action for all these things that he's created. And all these things produce some sort of fruit or some sort of offspring. There's something that everything that he's created produces. He puts that potential in it. He gives that as a call to action. And I love that we've seen a pattern of God not only producing something or creating someone or something, but then he gives that a certain power. He establishes it in his power. He gives it a certain power and a certain potential. But then he also gives that purpose and that placement. And very often we see that people who are in good fellowship with the Lord, he gives that clarity of what that purpose is. And he gives those clear steps to produce more, to multiply more, to make an even greater impact, to live out that purpose. So I don't know. These are side things that kind of pop up to me. Yeah, man, that's so good. Not just one nation, but a multitude of nations. That's what I'm going to make you the father of. Verse 5, what's more, I am changing your name. Name's been a very big deal. The meaning in names, this has been really big, because we even saw that in the last chapter with Hagar. The angel speaking to her says, you're pregnant, you're going to give birth to a son, you will name him Ishmael. And if you look at the footnote in that, Ishmael means God hears. Later it says, even the names of not just people, but places are a big deal. We've seen that with some of the altars that are set up, these stone Ebenezer's or whatever, that they have certain names, like God heard, God made agreement, God showed up. This is a big one, because it says in verse 14 of chapter 16, it says, later that well where this had happened with Hagar and the angel was named Bir Lahairoi. I don't know how to pronounce that. And it can still be found between Kadesh and Bered. But Bir Lahairoi means well of the living one who sees me. So even in just those two things, Ishmael means God hears, and then the other one is well of the living one, those capitalized meaning God, who sees me. I have been seen. So he sees and he hears, and I love that this chapter started off with God appearing and then being heard, he said. Like, he sees and hears. Man, that's, I don't know. Anyway, we got this renaming. He says, it will no longer be Abram. What's more, I'm changing your name. It will no longer be Abram. Now you will be known as Abraham, for you will be the father of many nations. The footnote asterisk for Abraham is that Abraham means father of many. So it's father of many, but specifically in this, it's saying father of many nations. God names and then says, yeah, not just any many, it's going to be many nations. Many. Wow. You can tell the quarantine has been cooping me up, because now I feel like I'm talking so much. Sorry. 6, I will give you millions of descendants who will represent many nations. Okay, so you're going to have tons of descendants, millions, who will represent many nations. So again, it's that plurality, many different nations, many different people. And then he says, kings will be among them. So these aren't just ordinary, everyday people. Like royalty and power is going to come out of this. So that's a really cool part of the covenant there. And I love that God's covenants have always been like, there's always been this extra to it. Like, and he didn't have to create everything excellent, but he did. He didn't just create like a system that works and enough potential to get by. Like, there's this thriving aspect of God's purpose and potential that he places in things. And I love that. It's a good reminder for us. Cool. 7, I will continue this everlasting covenant between us generation after generation. That is a big phrase to me because, again, we're trying to dive into this to see what we can learn specifically about God and the world that he's created and our possible relationship with him. I love this because God saying, I will continue this everlasting covenant, shows that God's promise, like, that doesn't change. Like, he sticks with it. But when he says everlasting covenant, generation after generation, it shows that, you know, God is everlasting to me, because it says, if I continue, I will continue this everlasting covenant. I'm going to continue this. It will be everlasting because I continue. So generation after generation after generation, all these things that are, you know, they're limited. There's a mortality to things. There's a limitation. This speaks to God having no limits. That's what that says to me, because everything that God has said so far has been so so telling of his character and so revealing to me and so specific that there are truths that are kind of hidden in that. And I think that that's one where it seems to be kind of hidden. I will continue this everlasting covenant between us generation after generation. So this isn't just you and me. All those mighty nations and all those kings that come out of you, all these nations that are established, I'm going to keep this covenant. It's going to remain everlasting. So you and I are technically still benefiting from this covenant, okay? I can't say because we haven't gone through all this stuff yet. But I can say we are bringing our experiences into this face value thing. So that's what my takeaway is, that this is an eternal covenant. So this covenant is still good. Man, so good. It will continue between me and your offspring forever. So again, you got God's eternal nature done in this, and that his word is binding and true and lasting forever as well. And I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. Whew. Okay, so he's not only is you got this forever and this everlasting, now he says, I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. So God, I am almighty, right? He says at the very beginning, I am God almighty. He's saying, I am God almighty, everlasting, forever, faithful, true, trustworthy in this, and I will always be your God and your God almighty. And any descendant, any nations that come and spring out of the future, he is still God almighty. I love that. Wow, I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. Yes, I will give all this land of Canaan to you and your offspring forever, and I will be their God. So the offspring of your offspring of your offspring of your, I will be their God. And I am giving this. So again, you have God saying, I will, I am. Here's the thing, I'm going to continue to be faithful in this, and I'm forming this covenant with you. This is going to go into future generations. I will continue to be God, but more specifically, like here, I am giving. Like God establishes who he is, but I love that any time that there's a call to action, he also kind of establishes something that he has done, not necessarily to entice it, but to say, this is why you can trust me, okay? And this is how you know that I am God. Like, I have done these things, or I am doing these things. Just like in the garden, he's like, I gave you this for this reason. Now I want you to go forth and multiply. Or I want you to have dominion over all the animals. I gave you that as your food. I gave you this as a responsibility, and here's your purpose. And I'm giving this to the animals for food. I give. I am the giver. I am the provider. I am God. I am the creator. And I am with you. And I just love that you have that pattern there. So I wanted to bring that up. And then we're about to hop into the sign of circumcision, but since this is already a 14-minute video and we've only gone through 8 verses, I'm gonna switch it up here, and I'm going to make this at least a 2-parter. So I'll see you in part 2 of chapter 17.